Jimbo's Garage.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Jimbo's Garage. Well, today we're at the West Coast facility here of Mercer Industries, and I'm here with Chris, the Western Regional Sales Manager. Chris, nice to meet you.
Always great to see you, Jim. I'm a big fan. Mercer is a family-owned business, started by the Wallachs. Actually, we're named after Mercer Street in New York. That's where their father started the business as a file company.
Wow, so not only do we have abrasives, cutoff wheels, saw blades, we also do knives and files as well.
Yeah, all in this warehouse.
Wow.
The three brothers took the business over from their father, and they built it into something I think much better than he ever dreamed of. Through hard work and bringing in good people. You know, when they say hard work creates good luck, they've had good luck from hard work. All right, hey Jim, so I brought you back to the back of the shop, and the reason is that, one, I want to get out my pretty tablecloth and show you some of the products, but what we do is we will take a regular wheel and flap wheel, grinding wheel, and we'll put a 5/8 hub, which is something that would look something like this. So we put it on, glue it down, have it crimped, because these things are going to be spinning and you don't want any dangers.
So you can go either way. You can either have them just a standard 7/8, or you can take the 5/8 hub and put it in there, and you actually do that right here in this facility.
Yes, sir. And really the reason that people do this is, you know, you got to take a wrench out, you got to tighten it down. If you're working on a project, or let's say you're up on a big scaffolding, or you're on a bridge, and you're doing some work, you don't want to be dropping a wrench or dropping a screw. You want something you can spin on, spin it off.
That's a pretty good idea. I know I've seen a lot of these out there. I actually have several myself, and I was often wondering what is the big difference between the 5/8 spin on and the 7/8. You know, I just didn't know the advantages or disadvantages. That's a good explanation.
Well, one of the things you'll find when you go through our catalog and our website is that a lot of our stuff is application driven. Somebody came up and said, look, I this is close, but it won't quite do what I need to do. If you do this, it'll do my job. And that's why you'll see a lot of products that do this very similar job, but they're a little bit different. Perfect example is the Type 1 cutoff wheel and the Type 27 cutoff wheel. They're both 045.
One looks offset though.
Yes. Why would we do that? I'll tell you.
All right.
So some guys who do cut and they cut straight, great, all day, just cut. Well, what if you had something sticking up, like you had a bolt coming up
on a flat surface,
or on a piece of metal, you got a big thing on it, you need to cut it off right at the base. Well, if I use this wheel, Jim, I got a nut under there.
Right.
So if I come in straight, you're going to have that nut, so you're going to be whatever the thickness of that nut is.
Right.
So you're not going to be flush. Well, some guys try to cheat and do it and bend. Well, that's dangerous.
That could be cause the blade to break, blow up, explode, or whatever.
Right. And then, you know, it's all on you, because don't bend the wheels.
So this is an offset wheel. This hides, that recesses the nut up in there and allows you to get a flat cut.
Exactly. You just got the nut out of the way.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's application driven. Someone said, you know, these are great, but you can't flush cut with it. And then we came up with this.
All right.
So the industry reacts to what's out there. Guys come to us and they're always doing a better mousetrap, I guess would be the good way of putting that. A lot of people ask, like, well, why do I want to spend the extra money for a flap disc when I can grind metal with a grinding wheel and just clean it up? Well, the logic of a flap disc is that it grinds and finishes at the same time. And what I mean by that is, in the old days, you'd come in with this hard grinding wheel and you would just knock that weld down.
Right.
But boy, it looked ugly.
Right.
You tried to paint over that and people could tell from 50 yards away that you painted over this. So what you had to do is, I'm sure you've done in the past, you come back with a sanding grit. Well, you can't come with an 80 grit. You got to start at a 40 and then a 60, and now you're at 80 grit. Well, you just sanded that same part 4 times. Every time you did that, you had an opportunity to ruin that part. Well, what if you came in with an 80 grit or even a 60 grit flap disc? You could grind that weld almost as fast as you could grind it with this.
You know, and that's true, because I don't know, in most of my videos, you see I don't really use a lot of grinding wheels. I have a whole wide a variety of flap discs and grits, and I use them all, and I'm finding out they really work well, having those different grits.
And the people, they choose the different grits because it's just what does the finish need to look like?
Exactly.
Does it need to be 120 grit, or will you get away with 60 grit? Because the rougher it is, the faster it'll remove that weld. Mm-hmm. but you're worried about finish, but you only sanded once. And if you watch your videos, and I do watch your videos, I do enjoy them, is you hit it once. You're not coming back and sanding that same corner 3 or 4 times.
Right, and I just recently started doing this. I start with, depending on the material, but I do start with a coarser grit, and I do end up going back with a 60 or an 80 or sometimes even a 120, depending on the material, to get that polished look.
Sure.
So yeah, it is definitely an advantage and definitely.
But it's good to sand it twice and not 4 or 5 times.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Time is money, as you know.
Exactly.
So that was the logic of the flap disc, and that's why they've become so popular.
Great, that's good. So we've covered some of the flap discs there, and I notice you've got this. You know, a lot of guys, you know, I say you got these trimmable flap discs.
Yes, sir.
You know, zirconia and ceramic, and so maybe you can just explain a little bit about the trimmable one, and then maybe I'll be doing a video on actually how to trim this thing.
Okay.
Coming up pretty soon.
Well, if you guys have used a lot of flap discs, and I know you have for a long time, is flap discs, people tend to use them on the edge. So when you're grinding on the edge, which is what you do with a hard wheel and any other wheel, you leave a hump in the back. Well, you can't use that hump because now you're hitting the backing material on the wheel.
Right.
And now you're throwing away, I like to say half the wheel, but the truth is it's probably about 30% of the wheel that you're not getting to use.
Right.
Now, what I tell people is like, you paid for the whole wheel. Wouldn't you like to use the whole wheel? Well, what you can do with this, by leaving it on the grinder, you can back it up into a sharp edge of a metal table. Some people put a piece of metal in a vise. It just come in like, kind of like you're peeling an apple. When you put an apple peeler on and you turn it and you see the little peels coming off, you're doing the same thing. You're coming up into an edge. This peels away. Now, remember, this is all gone. You've used all this.
Right.
So now you can use all this stuff back here because you're not hitting that edge, because you moved that edge from here to here. And you'll see on the wheel, it shows you where to stop right here.
So how many times can you trim this thing? How many? Oh, it's a one-time trimmable deal.
Yeah, because once you get here, there's
Now
no more wheel
there's
left.
nothing left. Right. All right, good.
So, but you got to use your whole wheel because you paid for the whole wheel.
Yeah, and I'm gonna do a demonstration on that in an upcoming video here. Also, too, I noticed there's a couple of different types of flap discs.
Sure.
I believe it's a 27 and a 29.
Yes, sir. This one here is a Type 27.
Flat.
Yes, you see that there's really no angle to it. This is a Type 29, and if you could look there, you can see it's
A little
got
bit of a bevel to it.
Well, the reason is, how do you hold a grinder? You hold a grinder at an angle.
I do. And I get a lot of flack for that. A lot of guys are telling me, hey, hold it more flat, you can use more of the disc. But
Well, this is what that's for, to compensate for the angle so that you're using the whole face. Mm-hmm. Now, ideally, if you did it exactly perfect, you wouldn't need a trimmable. But let's be honest.
Yeah,
Nobody
right.
does like this. We're all like this. We've all been trained
Yep.
on these
Yep.
to come at a steeper angle, which works great for me because you're
Good.
replacing wheels more often.
all right.
But for the guy who paid for the wheel and used it, I'm sure he'd like to use the whole wheel. So technically, if you hold it correctly, you'll use as much of the face as possible on a Type 29. Now, the other feature is when you come in, like this is a piece of metal here, when you come in with the Type 27, it'll tend to leave a mark whenever you first make contact because you're hitting that edge.
Right.
Whereas this, you're coming in a little bit more flush, so it's less likely to gouge.
Right. Oh, good point. Good point.
So that's, but if you're doing, people say, well, then why do you have a Type 27? Well, if you're doing let's say a pipe, or you're doing structural stuff where it's not a flat surface, you don't need that face, and then a lot of guys just prefer to have that edge not be tilted, but to come right in on a round surface or a structural surface where you're not worried about a nice flat clean. So
Good.
that's why we have 2 different wheels,
Good.
application driven.
Yeah, good point. While we're sitting here, I'm looking at this Steel Thunder. Now, this is relatively a new product for you guys,
Yes,
isn't
sir.
it? This is a carbide cutting wheel. I've got this on my saw, and I use this regularly. And I got to say, I've only had it for, I don't know, 6 months, I believe. It's only been out for not too long. And I've had really good success. This thing is, stays sharp, works well, and I think it's a good product.
Well, actually, this is one of the products of Mercer that is unusual in the sense that it was actually developed on the West Coast.
How about that? Here we are.
Todd Miller, who runs our facility here, really brought it here to our work area. And I'll be honest, we've been working on this wheel for 4 years. We brought out our wood cutting blades, and they were supposed to come out at the same time. But boy, if you don't get that mix just right, If it's too soft, the wheel just doesn't last. If you go too hard, the carbide gets brittle and cracks. So we've been playing with this formula for a while. Plus, we had to get the price down to where people could
It's
afford
affordable because these things, some of these things are well over $100, you know, for depending on the manufacturer here.
Yeah, and you'll find Mercer's below $100 very easily.
Nice. And they do come in different sizes.
Yes, sir.
This is 14. They probably have 12, and I know that I have a 10-inch and I think a 7 1/4 also.
Well, what we have is we have 7, 7 1/4. We have 8, 9, 10, 12, and 14.
Wow.
Now the interesting part, and as you know, it has to be a lower RPM saw on the 14-inch, like the Slugger that you have, or the Evolution that we use here in house. And you know, of course, there's other manufacturers. DeWalt's doing them now.
Right.
Makita. But on the 7 1/4, the RPMs of your standard warm drive saw matches the RPM of our carbide tooth metal cutting blade. So if you want to try without having to invest in a saw, maybe get a 7 1/4 blade. See if it really works as good as we say it does. I know you'll love it and you'll go buy that saw, especially now that they're so much less expensive than they used to be.
Right.
All right, hey, Jim, so we're back here at the hubby machine. And what we're doing back here is putting that 5/8 hub that we discussed.
Now, I imagine that's a process of maybe 3 or 4 steps. How does that all work?
Well, it's an automated process. Chris here, who is our tech, what he does is he'll load the wheel on. The machine will put epoxy on it, and then from the epoxy, it'll go over and then it'll crimp down the edges. So not only do you have the glue epoxy, you do have the metal crimped around it. That wheel is not coming off.
Okay, so now we start out with a 7/8 arbor wheel.
Yes, sir.
And we go to this 5/8 11 hub.
Yes, sir.
And how long does it take to actually maybe make 1, 2, 10, or however many?
Real quick.
Okay.
Chris's hands are moving quick.
All right, good.
The only thing I will tell you is the reason we crimp the wheel, because let's say, God forbid, if the epoxy was to ever fail, all the wheel would do is the grinder would spin and the wheel would sit there and not spin. What is not a dangerous item because of that crimping. So that's why we actually, not only do we glue it, we crimp it.
Awesome.
So, you know, safety is rule number 1, as you know. So the Mercer grinding wheels that have to be hubbed all come out of Southern California.
All right, so clearly, Chris, you've got a lot of products here. We can't go through every aisle, but it's floor to ceiling of all kinds of products, from metalworking, woodworking, culinary, you name it. Being a small family-owned and operated business, that's what I thrive at. You know, I like those family-owned and operated businesses. And where can we find more of the products, or all the products that you have?
Well, obviously we have a great presence on the internet. We're in a lot of retail locations, anywhere from welding supply to hardware stores to more industrial supply. We cater more towards the professional, like yourself, out there doing it every day. But because of the internet, people actually do have access to industrial products that maybe they couldn't get in the past.
Right. All right, Chris, thanks for having us out. I really appreciate it.
Well, you know, Jim, you know, you're always welcome, and we consider you part of the family. I hope you consider us part of your family as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
See you next time on Jimbo's Garage.